to growth, success of an entrepreneur.
We've raised the bar.
Learn firsthand from successful business owners and create your own path to success.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
It's time to hit the road to growth with team lead of the Enriquez Group, Realtor Vinny.
Hi, you Realtor Growth listeners. Today I have Mark. He is a restaurant consultant and author. Thank you, Mark, for being here today.
Thanks for the invite. Glad to be here.
Well, the podcast is a lot about people's failures, authors' failures. And I think, what is it? It's like 70% or 80%, some kind of high number of restaurants fail. So I think this one's going to be kind of interesting because you're consulting, helping these people trying to put together a game plan and structure. Something we kind of already talked about. It's not all game plans kind of work out. Kind of walk us through, I guess, before we get into that. I mean, what do you do? I mean, how do you describe yourself to people?
Well, I'm a creative type. I'm more of a creator than I am an operator, although I've been operating for years as well. I don't think you can be exclusively one or the other. I think we all are composites of many things, right? But in the end, what floats to the top with me is always my creative ability to vision different restaurant concepts and to try to bring them from thought bubbles to actual three-dimension operating spaces. I've been blessed in my lifetime to be able to work with some of our industry icons, including Norman Brinker, Phil Romano, Paul Fleming, here in Dallas, Randy DeWitt, people that also have great visions, but also need to collaborate to make those visions come to life. Nobody does this in a bubble. As much as many people will tell you they created something, the truth is behind the scenes, there's a whole group of people that collaborate individually and collectively to come up with some of these things that we now consider stalwarts in our industry.
I mean, so something that I kind of talked about briefly already about the failure rate, right, in restaurants.
Right.
Do you have like a number, and are you able to give that number of when someone works with you and your company, kind of where it is relative to where they could be if they consult with you? Is there a number?
Yeah, not really. I mean, if you look at general statistics, they're very broad-based, right? Like you said, 70% of restaurants will fail within their first 5 years, something like that. I mean, you can research those. But what that doesn't take into account really, any is some of the things that we were just discussing prior to going on air. Yeah. And that is, what are the other factors? What is the economic situation? What's the location that you're going to? Is there something going on nationally, like we had COVID for a couple of years? There are a lot of factors that come into play. Certainly, there are some grassroots things that everybody has to do. Put a good team together, pick a good location, study your concept. Years ago, I put together after our success at Payway Asian Diner, which grew nationally from 0 to over 200 units in the space of about 6 years. Somebody asked me to try to summarize what allowed that to happen. So I put together a little document I call the ATES, ATES, the ATES of success. And it starts with congregating a team, investigating. So everything ends in an ATE, right? And it's kind of a fun guide to, hey, the things you have to do that give it a kind of a common theme throughout. But there are certainly steps that I go through with everybody, whether it's, actually sitting down and going through the process or just with a discussion, that kicks it off. I listen to ideas. I look at the team. I consider the idea. I try to help people, polish the idea. If it's really a great idea, we try to recruit people to come in and help develop the idea. If it's more of an individual or a family that's doing it, we obviously work within the structure of the family or the investor group. But it's a painstakingly long process that most people don't have the patience to go through, and I think sometimes that leads to that failure rate that you quoted in the beginning. And I don't know why people tend to ignore it. I certainly don't, but that doesn't mean that I'm bulletproof. This show is all about, recovering from failure. in some regards, and how to recover and how to get back on the path to growth. So even when I, do everything that I think I'm supposed to do, for instance, I opened one of my most beloved restaurant concepts in 2008, mostly with my own money. I didn't know the financial crisis was going to happen. I was at that point, I felt like I was bulletproof. I'd come off a couple really good victories. I went out and said, okay, I'm going to put a little bit more money into this one than I'd have in the past, and I'm going to own more of it. I did my homework. I traveled. I studied it. I picked the location I thought would work, and then all of a sudden, the market starts crashing. I think the stock market in 2009 got to what, down in the 5 or 4,000s. So who would have predicted that? I did all my homework. I did all the homework except for the homework that I couldn't do, which is homework I didn't know I had. So even with my forms and my processes, I was not guaranteed. There was no guarantee on that.
Let's rewind, I guess, before, the 2008 kind of window. Before that, how did you get into the restaurant industry? Was your family into it? Was this something that you worked, a busser, like I think a lot of people probably listening, kind of working out the ranks. What was your background?
Well, I wrote a little bit about it in my book recently. The book is called Fork Fight. And it started when I was young. My parents weren't in the business. My dad had a definite passion for food and travel. So we had 5 siblings, and every free moment we had, he was taking us somewhere, and we were going out to eat. We were that family that showed up at the restaurant. There were 7 of us that everybody probably didn't want in their section, right? It's like, oh my God, here's 5 kids and a mother and father. We don't want them. But my dad indoctrinated us at an early age on food and going out in the hospitality business. 2 of my older brothers went to Cornell University and studied the hotel industry at the Cornell School of Hotel Administration. I followed suit years after I tried other things. So there are actually 3 of us who somehow got the message from my father and ended up in the restaurant business or the hotel business, hospitality in general. That's how it got started. Now, my first job was flipping burgers in a burger joint in Wayne, New Jersey, a place called the Anthony Wayne. Obviously, I seemed to enjoy it, or I was good at it, or both, and I stuck with it. And I just slowly but surely just found myself in the next opportunity. So yes, was I a busboy? Yes. Was I a cook? Yes. Was I a waiter? Yes. Was I a bartender? Yes. I've done all the jobs in the restaurant. None of them are unfamiliar to me. And apparently I did good enough to keep going forward and becoming a manager, district manager, director of operations, president, CEO, et cetera, along the way.
So in the 2008 that you were talking about, up to that point, you were kind of running the companies. Were you were investing your own money into some of these companies?
Yes, most assuredly. Not the entire amount, but in a certain era of time in the late 90s and the early 2000s, one of the kind of principles that a lot of restaurants grew on was ownership, right? You had to buy in, whether it was Outback Steakhouse, places like Outback Steakhouse had their partners, quote unquote, buy in, and it prevented people from moving around too much. So once you have a stake, once you have a financial interest, you tend to want to stay a little bit longer to see it through. So yes, in a lot of the ones that I did, whether it was exclusively me, partially me, or minutely me, there was always a part of me involved, and some potential payout in terms of that investment. So I'd say my first strong investment was a concept called Tin Star back in 1999, which I put a significant amount of money in. Back then, $150,000, $200,000 was a great deal of money. It still is, don't get me wrong, to be able to be the majority owner. And then I went to Payway. Payway, we had to put up money each time we opened a Payway. So at one point, when I had 20, 30 Payways, I had a couple $100,000 of my own money invested, even though it was a small amount relative to the grand amount. But everything I've done, pretty much everything I've done since then, has some degree of financial risk involved. Every once in a while, you take a position where you have reward without risk. You have the potential for bonus and a some type of buyout event that you didn't have to have equity involved, but it's fewer and further between.
Now, in 2008, we were talking about the things didn't go as planned. You had the game plan, it just didn't work out. When you jumped back on the horse and went back into the next business, did you feel like your voice shouldn't be as loud in the next one, or were you confident that it was just a blimp on the radar?
You hear a lot of people say, "Oh, great question." Well, that's not just a great question; that's a beautiful question, because it's true. Your psyche, it takes a while to recover. And in my book, there's a chapter I call Aftermath, which is what happened after that restaurant we just talked about failed. And I think that's the most eye-opening chapter in my book, because it talks about what failure does to your fabric, to your psyche. I don't care how confident you were prior to failure. I don't care how many people you knew. I don't care what level you had achieved in your business. Failure just absolutely pulls the rug out from under you and brings you right back down to a level that you hadn't been in for years. And I write about how it was difficult for me to call people that I had employed. I had a difficult time looking my peers, people who were still in business, in the eye. I would stay home. I wouldn't go out. I wouldn't say I sheltered myself or sequestered myself, but I became, okay, let's try to put a percentage to it. I'd say I became 5% of what I was pre-failure.
Wow.
I still existed, and I still could talk, and I could still maneuver my way through a conversation and into potential work, but the voice didn't have the same strength to it. The confidence didn't come through, so I was much more deferential. I was much more, okay, I could be wrong. It's hard to explain it, Vinny, but you really, people who know that you're not the same. They can sense it, like they say. Go ahead.
Oh no, I mean, did you have any want to maybe leave the hospitality industry and go towards something else that maybe in the same field, but it was like a new start for you?
Never an option, quite frankly. When you say leave the field, I smiled kind of ruefully to myself. It wasn't the field I was thinking about leaving. I was so engrossed and so immersed in the restaurant business that if I couldn't see the next thing in the restaurant business, I literally couldn't see anything. Right? I never had that second. I was a writer. I always wanted to write. I wanted to go to school to be a writer. My dad told me in no uncertain terms he wasn't going to pay for me to go to school to be a writer. So I had writing, but writing is not an incomeable, is that a word? I don't even know. It's not an incomeable skill unless you've been doing it for a while and you're known for it. I couldn't go to a Dallas Morning News, for instance, say, hey, I want to be a journalist all of a sudden. So it was the restaurant business for me or nothing. And fortunately, in the darkest of dark times, during that time after failure, when I didn't have any options, when you open a business and it's your only business and you put your whole heart and soul into it, you never think about what's next. That never enters your mind. You can't function with that little doubt in the back of your mind all the time. You're full speed ahead. You're like, okay, I'm going to make this a success, even if you ignore the kind of benchmarks along the way that said, hey, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe you should be thinking about having another, possibility, another option here. But no, I was so steadfastly committed. My father's Polish, half of me is Polish. They call it Polish stubbornness, right? Maybe I was too stubborn to see the possibility of failure, but it never occurred to me that I could fail until really the last couple months when I realized that was it. I had to close. I had to leave it all behind, and I got home, and I write about it in the book about how difficult those first couple weeks were. You go from having something to do the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep to having nothing to do from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. And you don't know how long that'll be. You hope that your friends and family and people come through for you, but it's a hard thing to face. I don't want to dwell on it because obviously here I am, starting a new concept and having a company to help other people. But ultimately, it was tough to dig out of that hole. Quite frankly, it's the toughest thing in my life.
What allowed you to dig out the hole?
So what allowed me? Necessity. They say necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, at some point, you have to pay the bills, and you're going to get kicked out of your house. The car is going to be repossessed. They're going to turn the electricity off, right? I mean, the things happen when you can't pay for stuff. And I came to the realization that unless at some point I couldn't rely on the goodness and the support of friends and family, at some point I had to stand alone again. I mean, how old was I when that failed? 55, 58, somewhere in that range. I'm not in a position not to work. So at some point I remember distinctly, and I hope this isn't getting too personal, Vinny, so stop me if it does. I remember sitting up one night and writing an email, composing an email. Thank God for email, because back in the day of having to write letters and mailing to people, I don't know what would have happened to me, how long it would have taken. But I wrote a very heartfelt email to about 25, 30 of my closest friends and family and peers and associates in the restaurant business, not begging for help, but essentially saying, hey, here I am. I'm available again. Anybody got any ideas they need help with? And of that 30-ish, I got 2 responses. And both responses led to work, helping people create new things. And both of them turned out well, thank God. Both of those are names that if you lived in certain areas of the country, you'd recognize. One was a concept called Velvet Taco, which is growing like a weed. Started in 2014. I think there's 40 or 50 of them now. My friends Randy DeWitt and Jack Gibbons, CEO and president of that company, had me come aboard and help them create this new concept. I got a consulting fee for that, and eventually turned into a minor partnership. And then a friend of mine, a dear mentor friend of mine in Houston, who has since passed, named Vincent Mandola, was doing an Italian fast casual concept called Pronto Cucinino. I had worked for Vincent years earlier, and he had me come on board to help him develop that concept and help grow that. And both of those dug me out of the hole for a short period of time. They weren't the longest term solutions, but they at that point, when you're at the point I was, Vinny, you're not thinking about what about 3 years from now. You're thinking about next month. How you're going to pay the rent when the rent comes, how you're going to pay your car payment so you can keep your car. So right then and there, it was enough money to keep me paying bills and keep me out of a really desperate situation. And little by little, other work came from that. Little by little, we kind of started climbing out of the hole and seeing the sunlight again. But it took a good 2-3 years for that to happen, quite frankly.
So you almost got pushed basically into the consulting business, then, it seems like.
Yes, absolutely. I've been a consultant out of college, but only as a kind of a landing place right out of school. And then I never went back to it. So I hadn't been a consultant. I graduated from Cornell myself in 78. So 78 to 80, I was in consultant, but that was all. From that point on, it was ownership or running somebody's company. So right up until about 2000, let's round it out to 2015 to be safe. That's what, 35 years out of the consulting business, and then back in it because that was the only way I could get back in it reasonably and do what I loved doing, which was helping create things. I wasn't in a position having been independent as I wasn't in a position to apply for CEO and president level positions of large companies, even though I had a little bit of that in my background. But I was in position to help other people create their own dreams.
How do you look at your success now relative to when you had success before that big hurdle blimp?
Yeah, with great humility. I mean, you like I said, you never really walk with the same degree of confidence again. You understand how fragile things can be, and COVID, by the way, reminded us just how fragile things could be in our business very, very quickly. And I wouldn't say overnight, but there wasn't a lot of time to prepare for it, right? I mean, so you always kind of keep an eye, what we call a side eye, right, on what's going on around you to be prepared for something that maybe you weren't prepared for initially. So you still have to be who you are, right? If who you are is a confident and sure person, you're still that person, but you're not that person to quite the same degree you were before the failure, because that would be ignorance, right? It would be totally ignorant and arrogant to think that couldn't happen again. And so you temper this new person that you've become with the understanding to be humble and to know that this isn't something that you're going to be able to quote unquote count on forever. I don't know how better to say it than that.
No, no, definitely. Is it now when you're looking from the outside looking in as a consultant relative to, I guess, to being a CEO or president or a manager? I mean, how does that process? I mean, how do you jump into the business as a consultant to give, I guess, your honest feedback of how they should grow and build?
Well, that's kind of a multi-level question, right? Because it depends on who the consulting client is, right? If the consulting client is more of a mom and pop, and I help some people in Arizona start their first restaurant business ever. So I was more teacher then. I was playing the role of educator and mentor. Then I jumped to a company. There was a company called Marugame Udon, which is based in Tokyo, that was growing in the United States and wanted to have a bigger footprint in the United States. And I started that as a consultant, trying to help them envision what their brand was overseas, because they had over 1,000 units internationally, but only about 6 or 7 in the US at the time. So we had to kind of merge, okay, what are you versus what do we think you have to be? So the consulting role was then more conceptually based, right? Okay, what you already have a concept that exists. What does it have to become for you to grow here the way you want to grow? So that was a different job than helping a mom and pop, right? And then each one is a little bit different, and everything in between. So Toradol Holdings Corporation, which is the company that owns Marugame Udon, is a multi-billion-dollar company that's international. They're a lot different than the husband and wife who came to me from Arizona with a couple 100,000 that wanted to build their dream. So you kind of have to take a look at the landscape of what you're involved in and figure out what it is they exactly need to do and what my skill level is that I can help them. Sometimes that's grassroots, from the actual inception of the idea to opening it up, designing it, laying it out, doing food tastings on the menu. And sometimes it's just tweaking. It's taking what already exists and saying, that's kind of individual, job to job, right? You really don't know until that phone rings and people say, hey, I want to do, and then they fill in the blank, and then you're okay. And to be clear, Vinny, I also am a partner in several businesses. So I consult, but I'm also in the business of owning restaurants. So I'm a single person. I've been married, never had children. So literally the restaurant industry is my life. It's not my occupation, it's my life. So I'm always traveling. I'm always assessing different restaurants. I try to go to New York once a year to just kind of see what's new and just take it all in. If I'm fortunate enough to have a client in an area that has a lot of restaurants, I work with the Michael Mina Group out of San Francisco for a couple years, and had a chance to travel with them and see what they were doing. So it's just a matter of who you're working with and what it is at the time that they want to do.
Has there ever been a point where you've maybe someone reached out to you about consulting with them, and you saw that their business would be a conflict of interest relative to another group you're consulting with, or you have ownership stake or anything like that?
No, that's honestly never happened. But I'm very honest with people up front that if I think I can help them, I'll take on the work. But if I don't see what they see, or if they're not flexible enough to adjust what they see, I'll give you a great example, and it's the largest restaurant company in the world, Yum Brands, right? Yum Brands, I don't know what they're up to, probably over 50,000 restaurants worldwide, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken. I helped them create a couple new concepts out of a division they called emerging brands years ago, back in the mid 2000 teens. And we had to create brands that didn't exist, but that had a base of something that existed in the market already that we were trying to look at, not copy. I won't ever take a job if somebody says, I want to be just like them, but just a little different. That's not me. That may be somebody out there, but it's not me. I would rather create something that's a little bit more innovative and a little bit less replicative. Is that a word too? I don't know. I make up words all the time, by the way. So I don't know who's going to try to transcribe this, but some of these won't get back past the spell check. Right? I don't want to replicate. I'm not a replicator. I'm consider myself more of an innovator, but not innovation, not stubbornly innovative. In other words, I don't want to create something that doesn't exist. Like, I'm not going to create a car that has only one wheel, and say, hey, this is the new car. I mean, come on, be reasonable about what it is you're expecting to do, but also know that if it already exists, getting involved in it is going to be tougher, right? Yeah. You got to have a point of difference. That's the part of these. Remember, I said the 8 of success. That's where I talk about learning how to elevate something, beyond what currently exists through innovation. So there's another 8, elevate and innovate. That's really at the heart of what I try to do.
Do you find more passion in helping those small businesses kind of grow, or do you find more passion in helping the bigger businesses expand?
I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that. I like them both pretty equally. I loved working with Yum Brands. I mean, in my book, I dedicate a good 3 or 4 chapters to my work with Yum Brands. Wonderful people, just absolutely outstanding professionals, 100% all in commitment to the industry. You couldn't ask for a better client. You literally could not draw out and create your own better client. Great people, committed to what they wanted to do, intelligent, all that. But yet I have those same attributes can be a mom and pop. The people that I worked with in Arizona that want to create their own brewery had great passion. They were deeply wonderful people, and with a good vision and solid path to how to get there. So it just depends. I very rarely, I think probably in the last 10 years, I may have worked with 1 or 2 clients that we didn't see eye to eye and didn't fulfill out the term of our agreement, because I always build in a 30-day opt-out for anybody that decides they don't like me, or any job that I decide maybe isn't where I can't help them the way I thought I would be able to help them. But it's very rare. I do a pretty good job of getting this all down in an understanding before we start work.
If we were talking in 5 years from now, do you have kind of goals that you're looking to accomplish in those next 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely, Vinny. I think this book has always been my hope of a springboard to doing more teaching, more guest speaking. I just got back from a conference in Phoenix, in Scottsdale, called the Restaurant Leadership Conference, which is yearly one of the best collections of restaurant executives, C-suite type executives that gather in Scottsdale for a 3-day conference on the state of the industry, innovation, storytelling, all that kind of stuff. To me, telling my story and sharing my learnings with a bigger audience is really my passion at this point. I will never retire, just simply because my business isn't the kind of business you retire from. You're always part of it. But I would love to transition into being a more broad-based, helpful to younger people, especially. I have a desire to educate. I was a teacher at University of Houston's Conrad Hilton School of Hotel Restaurant Management for a couple of years as an instructor, not as a full-time professor. And I loved doing that. I think people who have worked for me over the years, my teams that I've worked with, all encourage me to write and to continue to, to share my experiences with people. And that's kind of why we're on this podcast, I think. Part of it is because I have a willingness and now a forum through my book to maybe take this to the next level. That's my hope. So yeah, if you ask me 5 years from now, I would hope to still be doing podcasts, to be traveling around lecturing and guest speaking at conferences and things like that.
Thank you so much, Mark, for being on the Road to Growth podcast. If people are listening and they're looking to like book you or looking to see where you're going to be, have your next event, next conference, or they can purchase your book, I mean, what's the best way of them getting more information?
Yeah, sure. I've got 3 websites. The one that's best is probably mbrezinski.com, www.mbrezinski.com. It's got links to my book. I also have forkfightbook.com, which is solely about the book, and you can read a couple chapters that we tease on there, and also has the links to buying it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Target, wherever. I do want to share one last thing. Last week, my publisher, which was Post Hill Press, a division of Simon & Schuster, said it was the #1 new release on Amazon in the restaurant and food category. Wow. So that was kind of fun. I'd never written a book before. So when they sent me that email and said, hey, it was kind of a great moment of pride for me.
I'm going to just finish off one last question. And again, thank you so much, Mark. Do you have, technology, the future, and all that kind of stuff, right? I'm always intrigued by where people, especially in their own field, feel their industry is going. I mean, are in, let's say in 20 years, 15 years, whatever that time frame is, do you see any kind of major changes happening to the restaurant industry?
It's a very apropos question, because it was one of the big issues at the Restaurant Leadership Conference, right? Okay. AI and this whole labor shortage issue and how to overcome that in our industry, which, by the way, is predominantly hospitality. So you think about service and people. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for us, and you got to segment it. I mean, you can get away with more of that in fast food, what we call QSR, where there's less guest interaction. Fast casual, maybe some, but in full service, that's going to be a tough. You don't want to go in and give an order to a robot. You've seen some of these chains that are using robots to deliver food. I mean, it's a comedy to watch some of this stuff in our industry, because it's so juxtaposed with what we are supposed to be. This welcoming mat, these people greeting you at the door, the server getting to know you while he takes their order. We're going to have a hard time overcoming that personal touch in our industry. Not in all phases of it, don't get me wrong. There will definitely be more technology, more kiosk ordering, more robotics in terms of cooking. But I don't think it's going to be as quick as some other people think it'll be, because I just don't think we have the stomach for impersonal hospitality. I think that's a kind of an oxymoron, impersonal hospitality, right? But definitely technology. Everybody talks about it. It's gonna eke its way into our field more and more. I just don't think it'll be quite as prevalent as it is in some other industries.
Yeah, I mean, and I think people will probably want to pay, even if they pay more, to have that personal touch, because it's going to just be, yeah, it'll be nice.
That's a great point. We have way more price elasticity at the upper levels than I think our industry sometimes thinks we do, because people do. What do you remember? If I ask you, Vinny, what do you remember about a restaurant experience when you leave? You remember how good it was, how good it tastes, and you want to go back for it. Do you always remember what you paid for it?
No,
Not necessarily. If I asked you how much that steak you had at Fleming's or, Del Frisco's was, could you come within $5 or $10 of it? Probably not.
I think the only way is if it was like an eye-opening number where it's something I wasn't expecting. But if you felt that ambiance and you had a good experience, that number is probably not going to be remembered.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people in my industry that are probably stomping their feet right now, saying, "Oh my God, you're so wrong." But that's the beauty of our industry. That this is not a scientific thing. We're very much an instinctual. Maybe that's another word I just made up. We're very much an instinctive business. You gotta have instinct and information in our business. Sometimes we rely too much on information and not enough about instinct. My instinct, and I'm old school, right? I'm one of the OGs, right? My old school tells me keep the experience and the quality up, and people will follow and continue to be your guest and your customer for years to come without questioning how much you're charging them. That's my own personal belief. I understand if people don't agree with it.
No, I agree with you. Well, at least that's one person. We'll see if everyone else
There you go.
does.
Okay, well, yeah. We'll know soon enough, right?
Thank you, Mark, for being on to the Road to Growth podcast. Hopefully everyone listening got some great nuggets right there. And if you do call Mark out on one of the words he might have made up on this, hey, reach out to him, direct message him. I probably bet he loves to hear that.
and to read the book, because my publisher did the same thing. They go, no, that's not a word, So okay, I'm sorry, I'll rewrite it.
Please subscribe, everyone. Please share. Go in the show notes and go find Mark. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.